dead, they fled. Now, as I say, the name of the sermon is Not to Worry, God's Got This. But it could be, you could call it by another name. Buckley's Mixture in the Proper Use of Hate Speech. Now that's a funny name for a sermon, isn't it? Well, here's the reason I use this. David came to this man and he said, "What am I, a dog that you come to me with a stick?" He was a exceptionally strong soldier. He lived long. If you're a soldier and you're not good at it, you don't live a long time, especially in hand-to-hand combat. And he lived a while. And he said, "You're insulting me." And he said these things. This war is not your war. This battle is not your battle. God is going to give it to me. It doesn't matter that you're stronger than I am, that you're better than I am. It doesn't matter any of those things. Well, I'm going to start with this story of a school who set up this experiment. And it was a kind of a funny experiment. And they would bring 10 children into a room and they would ask a question. But they prepped the 9 children beforehand and say, "This is the answer you're to give. And we're going to test the 10th student." So they did this to primary school students and high school students, both. And the same result. And what they did is they had a chart. And they said, on this spot, there's A, B, and C, 3 lines. A is this long, B is this long, and C is this long. Now, when I point it with the stick, you tell me, you raise your hands, what's the longest line? Well, B, of course, was the longest line. It was this long compared to this. Everyone could see. But 9 of the children had been told, when he points to A, the shorter line, you're to put up your hand. And so the 10th boy, or girl, whichever it happened to be, went like, and he put up his hand because everybody else put up their hand. And they tested this, and they tried it. The next chart had the last one was the longest, and they put up their hand for the short one again, and put up his hand. What was happening is he couldn't, 75% of the time, that one child would knowingly put up his hand for the wrong answer because everyone else was. You see, they were, I must be wrong. Everybody else thinks this way. When David, the previous day, David's father had sent a message to him in the field, you're to go to the battle. You're to take food to the battle for your 3 brothers who are in the battle, and you're to come back with a report for me. And he said, "Yes, Father, I'll do that." And so off he went, and he arrived, and he heard this message. He arrived early enough to hear Goliath come out and shout these words, "If I fight with you, why are you all here? Why are we gathered together? We just need one from each of us to fight. And if I win, you become my servants. And if you win, we will become your servants." And David said, what's the answer to this? Well, everyone knew the answer. They knew the answer that if you went to fight with Goliath, you would lose. It was a done deal. He was so much stronger, so much bigger, you would lose. But David didn't know that that was the answer. He said, this is God's fight. God will make the end result in the favor of the army of Israel. All we have to do, it doesn't matter who goes, just pick somebody, send somebody and go. He's defied God, and as soon as David heard this story, he said, we got to put a stop to this right now. And his brothers made fun of him. What are you doing, you wicked youth? Go back to your few sheep. And David wouldn't stop. This was a case of righteous indignation, if there ever was one. Now, I want to tell you, I think I told you this story before, but there was a TED Talk about David and Goliath. A TED Talk is one of these, an expert comes in front of a bunch of people and they record it, and they're called TED Talks. And they put them on YouTube and in other places. And this guy said, we've got the story of David and Goliath wrong. We think it's some small person fighting against a much stronger person and winning. But that's not the way it was. And this was his interpretation. He said Goliath was a giant. And you know that giants have something in their genes that usually everybody shuts off. That gene shuts off your growth at a certain point. But giants continue to grow and grow and grow and grow. But when that happens, they also have some other things. They don't see very well, and they become somewhat clumsy. And so what he was saying was Goliath was big, he had lots of armor, but he was not the strong warrior that we hear about in the stories. In the Second World War, after the people had been forced off the continent of Europe to England, and they knew that Germany was coming, they built lots of tanks that were made out of wood. And they lined them up along the coast of the English Channel, and planes coming over would see all of these armaments that had been built, and Germany would have second thoughts about coming across the channel because they had so much war equipment. Well, what he was saying was Goliath was just fake war equipment. He would never have won. And plus, David had technology. He had a sling. So it was a guaranteed thing that David would win. What he did was he removed all of God save David. Now, you have to respect David in this story. I really like David because he gave God the glory. He said, this is the Lord's battle. This is not my battle. This is not, I didn't come here with a stick to win. God came to win. And when you compare that to Saul in Samuel, 1 Samuel 15:12, Saul is sent, we looked at this last week, Saul was sent off to the Amalekites to defeat them. And when he was coming back, Samuel went to meet him. In verse 12 it says, Samuel rose early in the morning to meet Saul, and it was told Samuel, saying, Saul came to Carmel, and behold, he set up a monument for himself, then turned and proceeded to go down to Gilgal. Saul didn't say, this battle is the Lord's. Saul said, this battle is mine. What a difference. Now, I want to start with the point one. One of these things is not like the other. Now, to continue on with Saul, and we beat up on him a little bit more before we continue on to David. In verse 10, chapter 10, verse 9 and 10, it said, Then it happened, when he turned his back to leave Samuel, God changed his heart, and all these signs came about on that day. When they came to the hill, behold, a group of prophets met him, and the Spirit of God came upon him mightily, so that he prophesied among them. And if you turn to chapter 11, verse 6, it said, Then the Spirit of God came upon Saul mightily when he heard these words, and he became very angry, and then he fought a battle, and so on and so forth. But the point is that God came upon him, put his Spirit on Saul. And at certain times, it came upon him mightily. Now compare that to David. In chapter 16, verse 12, verse 13. Then Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the midst of his brothers. And the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon David from that day forward. Now, that's a difference from what happened to Saul. God came upon him mightily at certain occasions, but he stayed upon him. Because if you read verse 14, it said, then the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul. So, if some people think that, well, you can't blame Saul. You can't compare him to David, because Saul had God's Spirit this much, but once in a while it went up a lot and then came back down. But David had it like this all the time. But that's not fair. You remember Gideon. God said to Gideon, when he was hiding in a well, thrashing the wheat, go in the strength that you have and rescue Israel. God is saying, if you trust me, the little bit you have is enough. Just go. Well, Saul had this much all the time. Every once in a while he had a whole lot more. But the point is, if you use what you have to 100%, then you can do mighty things. There's a woman had a really great book called Grit, G-R-I-T. Grit is I'm going to do this. I'm not going to let weather or anything stop me. I'm going to do this. And she said that if you had two people, one with an exceptional talent and one with a little bit of talent and grit, the one with the little bit of talent and grit would win every time. Because the one with the exceptional talent would say, well, you know, I've got exceptional talent, I don't really have to. I know a young fellow that could have gotten in the NHL. He had the skill. He had a slap shot where most goalies would say, okay, I'll just move over to the net, because this is going too fast, it'll hurt me. He broke the glass at the Coliseum from his slap shot. It hit the glass and broke. The point was that when he got called up to the AHL, he wasn't prepared, he hadn't exercised, he was out of shape, and it didn't go anywhere. He had the skill, but he didn't have the grit. So yes, I think we can blame Saul for his lack of serving God well. Number 2 is king of the sheep. David was the king of the sheep. Now, if you read that verse we just read, where Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the midst of his brothers. Now think about this. Samuel came and said, I'm going to have a sacrifice with you. You must gather all your sons. And I'm going to anoint one of them. And the first son comes up and stands before Samuel, and Samuel waves him aside. And the next one, and the next one, and the next one, and they don't even call David. He's the runt of the litter looking after the sheep in the field. And we're not eating until he comes. You call him, we're going to wait. And then he anoints David. And everyone's put out. But David goes back afterwards and he looks after the sheep. He does what he's told. What a great witness of someone who says, I know I am going to be the future king, but until God makes that happen, I'm not going to force the issue. He had lots of chances. He had Saul at his mercy when Saul was trying to kill him. And he said, no, God put him here, and until God removes him, I am not the king. He waited for God's timing. the third point is just like the lion and the bear. In chapter 17 that we read a moment ago, 33 to 37, it says, Then Saul said to David, You're not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are but a youth, and he has been a warrior from his youth. Saul recognized that this was a shepherd. He didn't fight. He didn't understand. Fighting there's a lot of training going into recognizing your opponent and reacting instantly to what your opponent is doing, and he had none of this training. But David said that doesn't matter. He goes on to say that your servant was tending his father's sheep when a lion or a bear came and took a lamb from the flock. I went out against him, after him, and attacked him and rescued him from his mouth. Now, I have a picture in my head of a lion with a lamb in its mouth, and it's going away. And David's running after it. And David's running after it with his staff, and he's smacking the bear or the lion on the side. And after about the third or fourth smack, the lion drops the lamb and turns and faces David. And now he's ready, and he's angry. He's lost his supper, and he's mad at the guy that's smacking him on the side with a stick. And David says, I took the bear and the lion by the beard, and I killed it. And he killed it with a stick or killed it with his bare hands. But the point is, he had no business being able to kill a bear or a lion with his bare hands. This was God's doing entirely. And David recognized it. And he said, The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion, the paw of the bear, he will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said, Go. He didn't care how tough this man was. He was going to go against him because that was what needed to be done. I like this part. Let me witness to you. In verse 45, he goes out into the field, and I can hear David is going out to meet Goliath, and after 40 days of Goliath going out and waiting, and no one came, and he would go back, now someone's coming. And both sides are just roaring. And David's about to speak, and God makes the entire valley silent. So that when David speaks these words, they echo back and forth, and there's not one person in all of the two armies that didn't hear David witness the power of God. He said, Then David said to the Philistine, You come to me with a sword, a spear, and a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have taunted. This day the Lord will deliver you up into my hands, and I will strike you down and remove your head from you. And I'll give the dead bodies of the armies of the Philistines this day to the birds of the sky and the wild beasts of the earth, and all the earth will know that there is a God in Israel. And that all this assembly may know that the Lord does not deliver by sword or by spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. David is saying, look, this is not what you think. You're already defeated. The battle is already won. Now, if you're going to win a battle for God, you have to be willing to chance defeat. When David ran after the bear, or after the lion, he didn't have assurance of, you never have assurance of you're going to win. It's never a sure thing. Except that you know that God is there with you. If you know that you're right, and you go against all the other people that think you're wrong, you don't want to put up your hand because everybody else knows they're right. And for you to put up your hand is going against the tide. 33 years ago, I worked at a place called Crystaplex Plastics. It was a new job. I'd been there 2 weeks, and they had this amazing table saw. Like, you can buy a cheap table saw and you can buy a middle. This was the best table saw I'd ever seen. It was a $3,000 table saw. Beautiful. And I used it, and I was cutting plexiglass, and we would make things, displays for banks and such. And I was cutting things, and I measured the thing, and it was different, a 1/16 of an inch off. And I was running along the fence. It should be square. There should be no reason why it's not perfect. And I looked at it, and I tested it, and then I came to them and I said, look, the blade and the table are not lined up. The table has moved. We're going to have to go underneath the table and unloosen the table and turn it until it lines up with the blade. And they said to me, Peter, we've been using this for years. Are you telling me that we never noticed that the table saw was wrong? Are you calling me stupid? And I said, yes. What could I say other than, no, sorry, you're right. So I took a piece of plexiglass and I ran along the fence and I cut 3/4 of the way and I turned it over and cut again, and the lines were like this. Not that much, but you could tell the difference. And then I took a piece of paper like this and I bent it like that, and I loosened the fence and put it in there. And then I cut another piece of plexi and they lined up perfectly. And so the people said, my boss and my co-workers said, I guess you're right. See, it takes work to swim against the tide. It's not easy. And people think that in a certain way, and they are hard to change the way they think. All these people that were lined up along the battlefield, the Israeli soldiers had one mindset. He's really big. How can we win against him? David had a completely different mindset. He said, how can we not send somebody? Because it's God's battle. I listened to a wonderful story on CBC, and it'll illustrate this point of how people have a certain mindset and it's hard for them to change. This man was a Jewish man, and he had a company that used a high-pressure washer. This is what he did. He would bring his machinery and he'd wash the side of your building so that you could take all that old paint off and repaint it. Or he'd do your trucks, or he'd do... Anyway, he had a great business. And he voluntarily said that if somebody comes to your building and writes hate speech on the side of your building, I'll come that night and do it for free. See, people who write hate speech want everyone to see it. And he says, I'm taking that away from them. No one will ever see it. I'll take it down tonight. It'll be gone. And so he would go, and he said, I'm doing this all the time now. It's as much work as my business. And I've got other people in other cities lined up to do it. We remove hate speech. And so the story continued, and he said, well, 90% of the hate speech is against Jewish people. And 5% is against black people. So 90 and 5, and 1.5% is against homosexuals, and 1.5% is against Muslims. And then 2% is a mixture of whatever's left. So the woman asked the question, and she said, how do you deal with all this Islamophobic hate speech? And the first thing that came to my mind is, was she not listening? 90% is against Jewish people. 1.5%. You see, she had an idea of what hate speech and who was hated. And it was wrong. And so a minute later, she said the same basic thing again, but she said, do you have trouble with all this hate speech against Jews? Because she recognized how wrong she got it. Her idea in her head was wrong. Now, you see, when David said to Goliath, I don't care that you're the most powerful. I don't care that you should win this battle. It doesn't matter. God doesn't care what you think about this as much as he cares about his people. And so it was hate speech, basically. And a lot of the things that in the Bible would be considered hate speech. I'm going to read the story of Peter in Acts 4. Peter just healed the lame man, and he's arrested. In verse 3 it says, he was preaching about Jesus, and the people were saying, that's no good, you can't do this. And they laid hands on him and put them in jail. And the next morning, in verse 8, Peter, filled with the Holy Spirit, said to them, rulers and elders of the people, if we are in trial today for a benefit done to a sick man, as to how this man had been made well, let it be known to all of you and to all the people of Israel, that by the name of Jesus of Nazareth, whom you crucified, whom Jesus rose from the dead, by this name, this man stands before you in good health. He is the stone which was rejected by you, the builders, but which has become the chief cornerstone. And there is salvation by no one else, for there is no other name under heaven that has been given among men by which you can be saved. Peter was saying it doesn't matter that you have this beautiful temple. It doesn't matter that it's your job to offer sacrifices. God put that all in the basket, and he's closed the top. It's no longer necessary. There's no other name under heaven that you can be saved other than Jesus. I don't care if you don't like my speech. I don't care if you call it hate speech. I don't care if it's inconvenient for you. And then if you turn into 17, they sent them out and said, we're going to have to tell them not to say anything further. Verse 17 says, but so that it will not spread any farther, this hate speech about Jesus, among the people, let us warn them to speak no longer to any man in this name. And they summoned them and commanded them not to speak or teach in the name of Jesus. But Peter and John answered and said to them, whether it is right in the sight of God to give heed to you rather than to God, you be the judge. For we cannot stop speaking about what we have seen and heard. Peter is saying, look, you're the boss. You're in charge. But God is in charge more than you. And yes, you can do things to us. You can put us in prison. You can kill us. But this is the truth. It's an unpopular message. If you think about Daniel, he had an unpopular message. It sent him to the lion's den. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had an unpopular message. It sent them to the fiery furnace. Stephen had an unpopular message. He got stoned. James, the brother of Jesus, had an unpopular message. He was killed and Peter was arrested. All these people said unpopular things and suffered for the offense of being right. The pastor at Weldon Church, David Hawksworth, writes every 5 weeks, I think it is, in the religious page, an article. In yesterday's newspaper, he had an article in the religious page, and he was calling on Christians to not hate. And he was saying, when we hate, it's wrong, and what he said was correct. But he didn't, it's more complicated than that. The problem is that everything we say is hate speech. All of those good things like Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, no man come to the Father but by me, is hate speech. It means all those other religions. Islam, it gets it wrong. If you say that there is only one way, there's only one sexual path that God has approved, that's hate speech. That's homophobia. If you say that the unborn are precious to God, it's hate speech. You see, the problem is that God is in charge. And he says, I know that, and I love you, but I choose your destiny. You're not a rock. You're not an island. You will answer to me. Everyone does. He uses words like, you've sinned. I'm going to judge everyone. Every knee